Hmm.
Okay, we are live. I am here with the one and only Gonzalo Lira. Gonzalo, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on. As always, it's greatly appreciated. And well, Alexander rather is MIA.
We're waiting on him. we're waiting. We're waiting on him to join us. But we said, we waited for a good 10 minutes, and we said let's just go live, and me and you will talk until um, Alexander joins us. Hopefully,
Yeah,
he'll be on soon.
yeah, like I was teasing you before the show. You're lucky that you have me on as a guest because I am the most talkative guy, and I know chat is gonna be like grilling me and roasting me for it. But hey, what can I say? I'm gonna be
It's
doing double duty today, so you all are screwed.
Well, you have another
But
live
truly,
that
thank you
you're.
very much for having me on.
All right, you're
Hmm?
you're going on another live as well later on today, or
No, no, no. This is no. I prepared for today.
oh,
I'm all set.
awesome,
I'm all good to go. You are the priority for me today. Yeah, and
awesome,
once again, like I
awesome,
said, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
great, great. It's great to have you on, Gonzalo, as always. And let me just do a quick hello. Let me say a quick hello to everybody that is watching us on Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, and the Duran.locals.com. Hello to the locals chat, and hello to everyone watching us on Telegram. Let me say a quick hello to our moderators. Zariel is with us. How are you doing, Zariel? Good to have you moderating. And I think I think it's just me and you and Gonzalo, who's also a moderator. It's us three moderating. All right,
Sounds
cool.
good.
And I'm sure sounds good. We'll have more moderators joining us. Real quick, Gonzalo, do you mind me asking you, how are things going where you are? Any news that you want to share with the community, if you can, as to what's going on
Yeah,
the ground where you are?
I'm in Kharkov Center. If you hear a little traffic noise, because the cars are running, but last night it was hairy. There were two really big explosions last night, and it was frankly unnerving. Because it was really close to the center. I have no idea where it is or what happened or what got hit. Because as I've told you, Alex, and some in the chat might know, I'm basically sort of like prohibited from Telegram in order to stay in the good graces of my minders here in Kharkov. And yeah, so as I understand it, I mean, there were two loud explosions, and this morning there was more rocket fire that I could hear. But now it seems to have quieted down. And yeah, the city it's a beautiful, beautiful day today. I mean, clear blue skies. And yeah, it seems from what I've been following on the military summary channel, which Dima does such a fantastic job, is that the Russian armed forces seem to be in the process of slowly but surely encircling Kharkov. They're making moves in the northwest of the city at a range of, I think it's about 30, 40 kilometers from here. And it seems clear that once the Donbass has fallen, and they've overrun the Kramatorsk line, which is the final line. And right now they're at the penultimate line of defense, right? They're at the, what's the name of the town? They all sound the same.
Nikolaev?
Sever- no, no, no. The line at the Donbass. Well, it doesn't matter. The defensive
Oh,
line of the Donbass.
Seversk.
Seversk. Thank you. Yeah, they're about to break through that line, and the Kramatorsk line is pretty much of a fig leaf of a line. And after that, it's going to be clear country from Kramatorsk all the way to Dnipropetrovsk. And that is going to be something. Um, Dima said last night in his summary, and I've confirmed this morning, that the Russians are amassing a fairly large force at Rostov. It seems to be about 30,000 troops. It's not clear how many. The Western sources are saying, oh, it's only 15,000. Other sources, Russian sources, are putting more between 30 and 40,000 troops, combat troops, with T-90 tanks, which I think is indicative of something coming up, because they have not deployed those T-90 tanks until just now. And so what is the goal? I mean, again, to refer to the military summary channel, which did such a bang-up job in explaining the situation, where the Russians have positioned these forces, there are basically two lines that they could take. They could reinforce directly Donetsk, or they could take the scenic route through Crimea and up north to Kherson and support the forces at Kherson and push forward and towards Zaporozhye and Nikolaev. Now, the other thing that's happening is that apparently at Nikolaev, the famous Kherson offensive is actually going in the wrong direction, and they seem to be the Zelensky regime forces seem to be retreating towards Nikolaev under heavy attacks, artillery attacks by the Russians, and so it seems that Nikolaev is going to be the next major theater of operation. And once that is overrun, and let's assume for the sake of argument that the troops at Rostov join up with the Russian troops at that are pushing towards Nikolaev, then they overrun Nikolaev, perhaps assault the city and at the same time bypass it and sweep around all the way to Transnistria and cut off Odessa from the rest of Ukraine. That seems to be the state of play. Yeah. So I think that interesting things are happening. And what's interesting too is that this former commander-in-chief of the British Armed Forces, his name slips my mind, who was very pro-Ukrainian and, fight on, dear lads and all that stuff. Well, all of a sudden he's saying that, oh, maybe now would be a good time to negotiate and because there's no clear path to victory, or much less pushing out the Russians from the occupied territories. And so that seems to me a signal that the West is recognizing that it's pretty much of a lost cause, and that if now, it could be that the Russians have a breakthrough and just sweep the whole country. We also have to keep in mind that the losses that have been suffered by the armed forces of Ukraine are catastrophic. Now, you could say that, the Russians are suffering similar losses. Well, suppose, just for the sake of argument, that they were suffering one-to-one losses. The problem is that the Russian army is, multiples bigger. Depending on how you measure it, between 3 and 5 times larger. Setting aside, of course, the issue of reserve troops and whatnot. And so, if they're going one-to-one losses, it's hurting the Ukrainian armed forces 3 to 5 times more, if you want to put it in those simplistic terms. And so, this is going to be very, very dicey. And I think that, frankly, the Russians have no intention or interest in negotiating anything. I think that they've made up their minds. And Medvedev, the former president of Russia, who's now I believe, the secretary of the Security Council of Russia, has said that there are only 2 solutions, or 1.5 solutions, as he said. One solution is for Russia to conquer all of Ukraine, and the other half solution, he called it, was for a coup d'état and for the new regime to negotiate some sort of peace deal. But the Russians have no intention of negotiating with the West or with the Zelensky regime, because they recognize that the Zelensky regime is basically puppets of the Western powers, and so they're not going to negotiate with them because they know that they can't trust the West. The West's word means absolutely nothing, and I think that people don't understand how. There's that old saying, fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. And they have no intention, after the failure of the Minsk II agreements, they have no intention. The Russians have no intention of being fooled again. And so, yeah, I think that the Oracle of London.
Yes, my apologies, guys. I got my timings a bit wrong this morning. So anyway, here I am.
Hello, Alexander.
He was with his
Hello,
girls. He was doing God knows what.
Let's finish your thought, Gonzalo.
Yeah.
We'll say hello to Alexander.
No, I lost my train of thought. It's much more important to say hi to Alexander.
You were talking. I can tell you what you were talking about, Gonzalo. You were talking about the Russians having lost all trust, and I suspect this relates to negotiations and such things.
Yeah. And they have no intention whatsoever of negotiating any kind of peace agreement with the Zelensky regime, because they don't trust the Zelensky regime, because they know that they're basically puppets of the West. And so they'd be probably willing to negotiate, perhaps, with, say, a military junta that overthrew the Zelensky regime and cut off all contact with the West. But I don't think that that's really in the cards. Even if the Zaluzny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, were somehow to overthrow the government, which I don't think is going to happen at this point, the West. And so I don't think that Medvedev's half solution, which is what he called it, of negotiating with the... Hello, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
I can hear you.
I thought I froze it. Okay, good. No, and what I was saying is that the Medvedev, I was saying that Medvedev said that there were 1.5 solutions to this situation. Either the Russians totally conquer Ukraine and occupy it, the whole of it, or there's a negotiated settlement with some government, some authority in Kiev that replaces the Zelensky regime. And I don't see at this time any kind of authority really replacing the Zelensky regime. And so therefore, I think that we're going to go all the way. And I think that the West is realizing it. And this general, the British general whose name slips my mind, you guys know that me and names are, not good friends. This Lord, whatever his name is, who gave an interview.
Lord Dannart. You mean Lord Dannart?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Lord Dannart, he said he really changed his tune. He had been very pro-Ukraine and go all the way and fight to the last Ukrainian. And now he's saying that, oh, well, maybe we should negotiate and find a political solution, and because there's no path to victory for the Ukraine side. And so it seems to me that clear that the West is realizing that once the Battle of the Donbass is over and the Russians break through Kramatorsk, I think that that's game over. I think that that would be a catastrophic loss. And of course, the other thing that bears mentioning that I mentioned previously, but to fill you in, Alexander, is that the Russians are assembling a force of some 30 to 40,000 men at Rostov-on-Don, and these forces are equipped with state-of-the-art T-90 tanks, which they had not used previously, and which the West was wondering, well, why aren't they deploying these tanks? And it could be that, yeah, you use those frontline tanks when you want a clean sweep, when you have like big open ground crossing. And remember, between Kramatorsk and Dnipropetrovsk, which is something like, I do believe, but I could be wrong, roughly 200 to 50 kilometers or something like that, there's basically nothing. It's basically open country. And so it could be that the Russians, they're realizing we're about to break through. The West is realizing the Russians are about to break through. The Russians are preparing for that eventuality. And so all of a sudden the West is realizing, they're having their come to Jesus moment kind of thing, that they realize that now things are getting really serious, and we will not be able to continue with this fiction that the war is at a stalemate, because it's not at a stalemate. The Russians have been consistently winning ground. It's just taking a long time to grind through all those defenses. And so, yeah, that seems to be the state of play at this time.
Well, just to say, first of all, that it's great to be here, and apologies to everybody that I
how are you doing? How are things 30 minutes.
Well, things in London are extremely bad. And can I just say that I was involved in an incident yesterday. People are always asking me. People are saying, "Well, you live in, you're not familiar with, the kind of things that often happen in different places." Well, I was in a place in Chelsea. Chelsea is one of the richest areas in not just London but the world, and there was a violent incident. An individual was extremely aggressive towards a shop owner. I had to act to call the police. It was a mess. Anyway, I don't want to say more, but the mood in London is extremely bad, worse than I have ever seen it. And the population is beginning to become extremely depressed, and it's now filtering its way into the media as well. I mean, I read, for example, and this is an article in The Guardian, about the quality of leadership in Britain, and they said that this situation calls for a leader of titanic abilities, and what we're getting instead is a leader who has the qualities of the Titanic.
Yes, I heard that quote. Yeah. No, it looks really dicey. in all of the West. I mean, you know, you had in Poland, you have people queuing up for 5 hours to get some coal for the winter. I had to double check that when I heard that. It sounded insane. But it looks like all of Europe is going down the tubes, Titanic-like,
Yes,
because of this stupid policy of following the Americans right off a cliff. I don't understand it.
Well, indeed, yes. And of course, we're now starting to get articles appearing from people like Simon Tisdall who want to see the war pursued until victory, whatever victory means. And he was writing in The Guardian also, talking about we must be careful of the enemy within. We know what that means. I mean, anybody who speaks for peace, he says there's Putin enablers everywhere. There's Putin enablers in the governments. He talks about Orban. He talks about Salvini. He talks about Maroni in Italy. He talks about lots of people in all sorts of places. But, you know, we must be on the watch for these Putin enablers because, you know, that's the danger that we're in. And Putin, who is supposedly desperate because, you see, he's losing the war. He's suffering catastrophic casualties, lashing. Bear in mind, this is the same Simon Tisdall who a week ago, or was it 10 days ago, was saying that, you know, we must actually take action to take out Putin personally, because while Putin is there. So I mean, you know, one week he's winning, next week he's losing, but regardless of that, we must now address the danger of the enemy within. So that gives you a sense. You asked me what the mood is like in Britain. That is the mood in Britain. That is the mood, I suspect, in much of Europe.
Potentially, Alexander, you're in more danger in London than I am here in Kharkov, because you're the enemy within. You know, you're what's that word again that I always think of? Oh, yeah. You're a realist, and therefore a realist is all of a sudden anathema. That's insane. That's truly off their rocker. I mean, if you ask me, I mean, how are people interpreting these words?
Well, at the moment, and I get to say this, at the moment, I think people are in shock. I don't think they really are thinking this thing through. I think most people in Britain, I mean, the media barrage is relentless. It's all Putin's fault. It's the gas war that he's waging against us, the energy war. He's weaponizing food. He's weaponizing energy. So it's he who is to blame. I think most people, for the moment, are accepting that narrative because, to be straightforward about it, there may be all these enemies within, but they don't have the access to the big media, and it's not getting through. But of course, what will eventually happen is that as people see their incomes implode, they won't care anymore. They won't care if it's Putin. I mean, Putin, after all, is far away. Ukraine is a faraway country about which most people in Britain, until a few months ago, had heard absolutely nothing. They're going to start asking themselves, well, all right, you tell us it's Putin. We accept that. But what is your solution? What idea do you have to get us through? And they don't have any ideas at all. I mean, because I don't know whether you were listening to Jerome Powell in Jackson Hole, but it was very interesting because he said, well, we can tighten monetary policy, but at the end of the day, we can't solve the supply side issues. That is not within the power of central banks. And that's blindingly obvious. So you can raise interest rates, and that may reduce demand. And we're going to come to a moment to what that means in Europe. But ultimately, if there is not enough energy and not enough food, then the prices are going to go on rising. And unless you crash demand to the point where you basically got a depression on your hands. Now, this isn't something that people in Britain and in Europe are used to. I mean, usually what happens in recessions, both you, Gonzalo, and I deplore this, but the pattern for the last 30 years, in fact, even beforehand, since, if you like, Alan Greenspan, and he's put after the stock market crash in 87, the pattern always and invariably, whenever recession beckons, is for central banks to cut interest rates. And of course, they've responded usually by increasing money supply through things like quantitative easing. Now, What we are in at the moment is a unique situation where the central banks are being forced to raise interest rates because inflation is now in danger of getting out of control. At the same time, as a supply side crisis is intensifying. So, given this situation, they can't get round the problem by just reducing interest rates and increasing the money supply. So what's going to happen is that historically, whenever there was an economic crisis, people borrowed. They borrowed their way out of it, not just governments, but people. They took out loans. They took out credit against their homes. If you're talking about Britain, they did that to a very great degree. Debt levels increased, credit cards were used, all that kind of thing. That kept demand high because you see interest rates were going down. But now what we're going to get instead is that the cost of borrowing, of overdrafts, of mortgages, of credit cards, of hire purchase arrangements on cars, all of those sort of things are going to be rising at one and the same time as you're going to see energy costs and fuel costs and food costs rising too. And that isn't something we have experienced in Britain since you'd have to go back to the 70s to find something analogous. And of course, that was a different economic era. The closest to go on.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that, this is something that I used to write economic commentary back in the early 2010s. And at the time, we were thinking these people are crazy what they're doing after the global financial crisis of kicking the can down the road. Because the issue is, of course, with the metaphor is that you kick the can down the road, but eventually it gets so big that you can't kick it anymore. There comes that moment that it's just impossible. And some people call it the Minsky moment, the point where you can no longer borrow to pay back the interest or the payments that you made on previous loans. We are getting to that. We are there, I would say. And of course, these kinds of moments are not like one earthquake. It's a slow. It's a car crash in slow motion kind of thing. And the issue of lowering interest rates is since '87, Greenspan and subsequently Ben Bernanke and now Jerome Powell, they've all been criticized. And also Janet Yellen there, they've all been criticized for doing that, of lowering the interest rates. And to those of you in the chat, you have to understand what interest rates are. They are the price of money. That's what it is. Think of interest rate as the price of money, how much you pay for the money you borrow. And therefore, what happens is that in any situation where you have the government subsidizing a particular price, then you have market distortions. You have severe market distortions. And that's what's happened. And these distortions, eventually, they have to be ironed out. And what has happened is over the last 40 years, basically, ever since the last real recession, which was during the tenure of Paul Volcker, the United States Federal Reserve and to a lesser extent the Bank of England, they've been goosing interest rates to avoid a real recession, a real crash, because a recession is necessary to clean out all the malinvestments. You need people to go bankrupt to clear out those malinvestments and basically, clear the blackboard. But they haven't been doing that for 40 years now. And we are getting to the point where it's unsustainable. And Jerome Powell, of course, he's saying we can't cut interest rates. In fact, we're going to have to raise them because we're at that position that inflation is getting away from us. The inflation, of course, because of all the money printing in the decades, plural, previous to that. And so here we are. There's no out for this situation. And this is a catastrophic period of time because the industrial base of the West has been completely hollowed out. The last real manufacturing industrial country was Germany, and it's been crushed because of these stupid sanctions. I mean, that was just self-inflicted. And so we're about to suffer Great Depression 2.0, but it's not just going to be a Great Depression 2.0, it's going to be an inflationary Great Depression, which the last time that was experienced by a modern economy was Weimar Germany. And we all know what happened after that. And even, what's his name, Nigel Farage was saying, he just said it this morning or yesterday, I read it this morning. He said that, the way things are going, the backlash will give rise to somebody much, much harder core and more nationalistic and protectionist than anybody we've seen so far. And he's right. You know, I mean,
can you explain that,
Absolutely.
Gonzalo, a bit? Inflationary depression, like practically, what does that mean?
Okay, depression is a collapse in demand. A collapse in demand because people lose their jobs, and they lose their jobs, and so they spend less. And as they spend less, companies no longer can sell their goods or services, and so they begin to shut down, and then more unemployed are added to the rolls, and it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. That's the classic definition of a deflationary depression. Now, the way you get out of that is for the government to create jobs, like the New Deal, to prop up the economy. Now, all of this is classical theory. If you actually start going to the nitty gritty, it's a little bit different. And a lot of the stuff that we have learned is not actually as it is. But for purposes of this argument, let's leave it at that. For purposes of this discussion, rather, let's leave it at that. Now, an inflationary depression is when the people are losing their jobs and they need to get more cash because there is less supply of goods and services. And as there is less supply, the supplies that are available start to go up in price because people are willing to pay whatever is necessary because these are essential goods and services. And as that starts to happen, the government, out of panic, starts to print money. And they start printing money and handing out money. California said that they were going to give free money to people because of the more expensive gasoline. What do you think that's going to do? That's inflationary, of course, because you're going to be pumping more money into the economy for fewer goods and services. That is supply, what Jerome Powell was saying, to circle back to what Alexander was pointing out. Jerome Powell said, this is a supply problem. There is not enough energy resources that we need, that we cut ourselves off from in Russia. And because we don't have access to that Russian energy, there is the possibility for the West to get that Russian energy, but they have to go through Indian and Chinese middlemen who are going to take a big slice. And so, you know, all of this means that all prices go up. People don't have the money. And so that's an inflationary depression. And what starts to happen is that people like you and me, they start selling first, you know, their toys, their jet skis or whatever toy, motorcycles, where they start selling those at rock bottom prices to get cash to buy food, to buy energy, heating, electricity. And then they start selling bigger things. Eventually, they start selling their homes. And eventually, as what happened in Weimar, Germany, you know, people start literally prostituting themselves in the corner to get a few nickels to buy a loaf of bread. That is what happens. And this isn't new. This is historically, it's very well known. And they are going in that direction, and they don't know how to get off this freeway that is heading in that direction. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. Can I just add, by the way, just to supplement two quick points. The last time we had an inflationary depression in Europe, people don't know this. I mean, I'm talking about Western Europe. You know, Eastern Europe has had horrific experiences since then. But Western Europe was actually in Germany in the 1940s, when again massive overspending by the German government in the 1940s to try to keep the war going led to basically a currency collapse. And that caused a demand collapse. I mean, it was horrendous. And you had to basically completely recreate the economic system in order to get out of it. But Germans, by the way, have a much more vivid memory of that than other Westerners do. People talk about Weimar, but I've heard of Germans talking about the hunger winters of that era. So, you know, this is from the 1940s. The second thing I wanted to quickly say is that, of course, what is particularly cruel about this recession, this inflationary crisis that you're talking about, Gonzalo, is that one of the fundamental things people do not understand in the West is that it's happening because of the loss of dominance over the world economy that the West previously had. So, if you're talking about oil or gas or food, these are internationally traded commodities. So, if China or India boost demand at a time when demand is shrinking in the West, and of course, if the West has imposed upon itself also price distortions and restrictions through sanctions wars, then of course oil and gas will flow to China and India, and other such places, and they will not flow to the West, which will intensify the inflationary and economic spiral there. Now, there is a way out of this. There is actually a way out of this, and that is to lift sanctions, to end the attrition war.
Impossible.
Politically, at the moment, it is impossible. Now, I have to say, I think that some people are becoming wise to these dangers. I think I think Jerome Powell, when he talks about the central banks can't fix supply, he's hinting that you've got to do something to sort out supply. The Federal Reserve, as you know better than us, Gonzalo, was never keen on the sanctions war at all. They are dropping heavy hints about this. Lord Duran, who you mentioned, I was listening to his interview, and of course he was very, very careful what he said, because he's a loyal servant of the British government, even though he's actually retired. But he's going to be very careful not to break with the formal consensus. But again, when he talks about a crisis, about no road to victory for Ukraine, I can't help but think, because he's a clever man, that he also realizes that the problems within Western societies are becoming impossible, and that the deal which has to be done in order to save the West, or at least the European economies as well. And you talk about money printing, and of course, what happened in Germany in the 20s and again in the 40s. Well, in Britain, the solution that Liz Truss is coming up with is, of course, cutting taxes. In other words, increasing the government deficit at precisely the time when interest rates are rising and the government's own borrowing costs are going to be increasing. So that's a very dangerous strategy to follow. And of course, if you're looking at the other side, what Keir Starmer is doing, he wants price controls. Now, price controls. Yeah, we're going to come to this in a moment. Yeah, price controls in a time of inflation, a very high inflation. Well, the experience of that is that all they ever do is create shortages and increase problems in the system. So, I mean, it demonstrates how.
No, and also what happens with price. Yeah, and also what happens is that price controls also create a black market, and so the rich are able to get the necessary goods and services, and the poor aren't, and that creates enormous social unrest. And so, whatever way you look at it, this is a disaster. Look, bottom line, if we're talking, do you guys hear me?
Yeah, absolutely, clearly.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, clearly. We can hear you clearly. We can hear you.
Yeah. What? Okay, good. What I wanted to say is that, bottom line, we are headed for a smash. There's no way to avoid it. And there's no creative solution that will magic our way out of this crash that's coming. And we have to be realistic. If anything, we should look at the future with eyes wide open and mouth firmly shut and realize that there is no way to avoid this smash, which is of a combination of systemic problems that go back 40 years, as we talked about before, of goosing the economy by way of cheap money, and also this sanctioning, which was just idiotic, and it only hurt the West because they misjudged the true weakness of the Russian economy, and they thought that this would be like sanctions for 2 months, there'll be a new Russian government, and we'll be able to reopen everything, and everything will be wonderful. That's what they were thinking, and in their hubris. They went off this cliff without thinking through the problem, and now here we are. So there is going to be a smash, and I would recommend to everybody in Western Europe that back in October of last year, I did a fairly celebrated video where I said, the time to leave the West is now, in October, because it just looked economically that the next 18 months from there, just in October of 2021, I did not think that there would be a war with Russia. But just the economic situation in October 2021, I thought to myself, this is it. There's going to be a crash. And now it's even doubly so. And it's not just going to be that the stock market crashes or anything like that. I think it's going to be a complete social collapse of some sort, because in
Yeah.
the United States, people have gone insane. I mean, really, with the various sexual movements and all kinds of craziness,
Yeah.
and everybody's saying, "What is going on?" And so it seems to me that we have to just sit tight, put on the seatbelts, the 5-point seatbelts, and get ready for a complete smash. Because realistically, gentlemen, I ask you, do you see any way of getting out of this hole, that any way of avoiding this wall that we're about to hit?
Yeah. Okay.
Realistically?
Before I answer, before we deal with that, I just have to reference a comment that's just come from Sanjeeva, which I've just seen, in which he points out that the global South is in a severe crisis, even worse than the West is. Bangladesh, Pakistan, much of Africa, much of Central America, Argentina. Here we go. The South is about to explode. Bangladesh, Pakistan has only been able to obtain one delivery of LNG, which it needs. I mean, because it can't compete with prices. And I was doing a program on Saturday with a Pakistani journalist telling me about the mood in Pakistan, which is explosive. And just coming back to Sanjeeva, much of Africa, including North Africa, Argentina, Central America, are reeling with fuel and food crises. These are time bombs that will explode sooner than the West. Yes, they will. And can I just make a further point? These time bombs are going to be catastrophes for these societies, but they will feed into the crisis in the West.
Yeah.
Because these are places which also are suppliers. They're part of the global supply chain. And one of the reasons why political support for the West in the United Nations has collapsed. There was an attempt to try and get a statement published a few days ago criticizing Russia over the Ukraine conflict, talking about the need to return Crimea and all the rest back to Ukraine. Only 54 countries signed up to it. And one of the reasons why there is this enormous alienation from the West on the part of the global South is because the global South is asking, what is the West going to do? An African diplomat, I think he was from Nigeria, actually said it. Where is the talk from the West about finding a negotiated solution to this crisis? Where are the diplomatic initiatives? There are none. You want to fight this war of attrition, you scorched earth war of attrition. You're doing immense damage to your own economies, but you are doing enormous problems to us, far greater problems to us as well. And you don't seem to care. And that's why the global South has become completely antagonistic to the West over this crisis. It's not something
there's something else. There's also something else too that I mean, you're absolutely right. And there's also another factor in this whole play, that who is commodities rich? The Russians. And so the Russians are going to be able to use their commodities as a very effective geopolitical I don't want to say weapon, because that's the wrong word, as a very powerful geopolitical tool. And they will be able to sell to many of these countries in the global South, not in a direct quid pro quo, but rather in the sense of like, here, we are helping you. We are going to sell you natural gas or whatever at a lower discounted price, because we want to maintain a good relationship, which is what the Russians diplomatically have done for years now, decades, really, since Lavrov came into office. And so, this whole issue that they're going to leave Russia isolated, that's a fool's notion. On the contrary, because the global South is turning towards Russia, and also they are agreeing with what Putin has been saying, that the West doesn't care about the global South. It's all just nonsense, just pretty words in order to extract resources from the global South, and we want to help you. And so, it's playing to the Russians. I mean, if the West strategy is to defeat Russia in this war, because let's face facts, the West is at war with Russia, just the West hasn't deployed its own troops yet, but it is at war. Well, they're just playing into the hands of the Russians, and it's just so stupid. It's just so stupid. Sorry.
What does it tell you, Gonzalo and Alexander? Two questions. Number one, you said that, Alexander, you mentioned that Jerome Powell is dropping hints about the fact that the Biden White House should start to pull back on the sanctions. So the Fed, the most powerful institution in the United States, if you could call it that, is dropping hints, and they're saying, pull back, because if you don't pull back, we're heading towards disaster. But what does it tell you that the Fed has been saying this since the beginning, and they continue to say this, but no one's listening to them, which to me hints that ideology is winning here. That's my first question. Then my second question is to both of you once again, but maybe to both of you. What does it mean, a smash? Because I understand the I don't want to say advice. I understand saying, you know what, get out now because it's all falling apart. I understand that. But 99% of people, they can't get out. They don't want to get out. This is where they grew up. This is their country. This is their people. I mean, they don't want to go somewhere new. But what does it mean then practically when you're talking about a smash? What should people be preparing for I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not asking for predictions. What would you say is something that we should be on the lookout for as things worsen? And what can people do to just weather the storm if possible? And once again, I don't want to put anyone on the spot to predict anything or to give advice either. But those are the two questions that I have to both.
Let me answer the first question, because it's something that I have some direct knowledge of through people who work there and historical knowledge of the institution. You're asking why is Jerome Powell making hints about we should dial it back and negotiate. Well, the problem is that ever since Alan Greenspan took power as a federal chairman in August, I do believe it was August or July of '87, the Federal Reserve has deliberately and consciously tried not to be a driver of policy. Bizarre as that may sound, you would think that they are the ones who are in control of monetary policy. But in fact, it has become a highly politicized institution. Paul Volcker was a truly independent central banker who did what he thought was best for the American economy overall. Whereas starting with Greenspan, and Greenspan worst of all, because not only did he acquiesce to the political decisions in Washington, but he installed a whole coterie of people in the Federal Reserve who pretty much think as he does. They are extremely timid. That's the bottom line insofar as the Fed. And everybody knows that. The Eccles Building is a beautiful neo-Greco-Roman edifice, but its solidity is belied by the weakness and the plasticity, if you will, of the people who work there. They are not going to go against the political leadership. They might give little hints, but when push comes to shove, if anybody from the State Department or the Pentagon barks at them, they'll go like a little chihuahua. They'll go running to their little crate and shiver there in the darkness. Okay, they are not going to do anything insofar as being independent in their judgments. And so forget about any help. The hints and little nudges that Jerome Powell might be doing, they are signals that people like you and me, you both and myself, we will listen to and realize where they're coming from. But the people who are actually making decisions in Washington, they will completely ignore them. So that's my answer to your first question. Alexander, you should take the second question.
Well, I'm going to just discuss a piece of history now, because it's obviously where I come from. But we have actually been in a not entirely dissimilar situation to this. And first of all, Alex is absolutely right. It is ideology. It is ideology that is driving this. Now, in the 1930s, Germany was in the grip of an ideology. And the head of the central bank, who was a man called Hjalmar Schacht, he's not very well remembered today, but he was a most extraordinary person, a very controversial one in some ways. But anyway, a very, very capable central banker. He tried to explain to the German government of that period that what they were trying to do was unrealistic, that it was going to create massive problems in the economy. That it was going to create massive imbalances in the economy. which could only be solved in the short term through extreme measures. And those extreme measures would in themselves ultimately come round and would cause the collapse of Germany. That's what he said. And he came into conflict with the German leadership of that period. And we all know whom I'm referring to. And the German leadership of that period sacked him. And the result was the collapse of Germany in the mid-1940s, the division of the country, and a hyperinflation crisis, and a complete reconstitution of Germany by external powers. Now, I'm not saying it's going to come to that in the West to the same degree, because we mustn't push these parallels too far. But there is an example of a central bank trying to push back against an ideologically driven policy that was becoming increasingly detached from reality. That central bank found it impossible to win the arguments against people who were completely tied up within the ideology. And of course, the smash, you can't ask an example of what a smash can look like. Well, there is an example. Now, I don't think, as I said, we're going to get into that kind of situation. At least I hope not. But what we could see is a major economic depression combined with, food and energy shortages. And eventually there will be a pendulum swing, and we would get the kind of situations that Gonzalo was talking about. We get new political leaders coming in, perhaps not very nice or likable or easy people, but they might conceivably start taking some of the steps that would be needed to repair the situation. But of course, we can't count or assume that they would do it wisely or in a moderate and measured way. That is what a smash looks like.
Yeah, and a smash, in the way I'm thinking of it, if you want to think of it like in terms of metrics, it would be a cratering of national GDP by 25% and unemployment of the working age population of at least 50%. I mean, that kind of just smash, And my thinking is that this is coming. And the sanctions against Russia, which have driven up the price of commodities, energy commodities especially, has just accelerated this inevitable crash. See, this isn't something that people did not predict or anticipate. People in economic circles, especially in the alternative financial circles, the heterodox financial circles, have been talking about this for decades now. That the way things are going in the West, it's going to lead to a systemic collapse. The remarkable thing is not that we are going to hit this systemic collapse. The remarkable thing is that it's taken so long, because all of these measures have been baked into the cake, and it's been trundling along for so long that people came to this weird conclusion that, oh, this is the new normal. This is normal. This is okay. This is good. Even this is a good thing of just printing money and just distributing it. And that's why you have very, very foolish ideologies like modern monetary theory, which is just basically, it says, just you can print all the money you want if you have the reserve currency. And so don't worry about deficits. They don't matter, which is just crazy. But these kinds of ideologies only arise when the systemic imbalances have been in place for so long and the economy is so big that you don't see the negative effects for quite a while. But now we're finally seeing those negative effects. And it was this war that, and the sanctions, not the war, it was the sanctions that have triggered this. And I think that there is no return. There is no return to the old normal. I forget who it was. It says, I do believe it was Macron who said that the era of affluence is over. Yeah, he was not wrong. He was dead right, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I mean, he's dead right, but he's got no solution and he's got no idea. By the way, on the question of modern monetary theory, you find many people on the left in the United States and in Britain who still advocate it. They still say that the solution to the problems is money printing. I read this all the time, every day. These progressive commentators, they say that raising interest rates is a mistake. Taking all these austerity measures is a mistake. What we need is to increase money spending, and that's the solution to this. So there are those people there. They're there still. They haven't gone away. They haven't given up on their beliefs. On the contrary, they're becoming more fervid about them, and they're getting some traction because, of course,
a lot.
at this early stage in an inflation crisis, if you are a working class household in Britain, in Germany, and somebody comes along and says to you, "Well, look, your energy costs are rising by 80 to 100%, so we're going to give you all the money you need to cover those." You're not going to say no. I mean, on the contrary, you might be inclined to vote for the person who offers that. And if that person says, "Don't worry, this is going to be fine because we got this amazing theory that proves that it works." Well, again, I mean, many people, who are in desperate situations might clutch to that. They might, at some level, feel uneasy, but they'll say to themselves, "Well, at least these people offer us personally a solution." So we mustn't assume that, the era of free, cheap money is gone. It might just not be cheap money coming from central banks. It might be coming from governments at a time of inflation and high interest rates. Of course, in my opinion, that would be a ruinous idea. But, there are going to be people who think like that. And I mean, I read these things every single day. I don't know. I'm not so familiar with the economic debates in the United States, but in Britain, I read about them all the time. I mean, I see these people. They're active on Twitter. They're active in the letter columns. They're active in the sort of progressive version of what you might call alternative media, only they're not really very alternative on the big things. But of course, on the key issue of ending the sanctions war, trying to do a deal, trying to find some way out of the supply problems, perhaps revisiting energy policies, which we've seen building up over a very long time. Well, that, of course, is impossible. It's what the Germans call verboten. It is forbidden. You don't go to that kind of territory. Now, of course, eventually, maybe 6 months' time, 3 months' time, a year's time, the mood will change. People will say, we don't care if it's this horrible man, Putin, who's doing all this to us. At the end of the day, we have to live. We have to do a deal with him. He's not asking the impossible. He's not being completely unreasonable. He doesn't want to come here and run our affairs. So, you could conceivably see an uptick of that. But that isn't the case at the moment.
But one thing I have to point out of that, okay, suppose in 3 months, 6 months, a year's time, at some point, they wake up and they realize, well, we need Russian energy. Is Putin and the Kremlin going to say, "Oh, sure, come and buy all the gas you want from Gazprom"? I don't think so. I think that the Russians have correctly interpreted what has happened since the 24th of February as the West declared war, because it is war. The sanctions, it was designed to hurt the Russian people and the Russian economy and overthrow the government in the Kremlin. So they interpret it as war, just war by other means. And so what are they going to say? "Oh, sure, have some gas, have some some oil." No, I think that they're going to say, "Take a hike." And frankly, it would be within their rights to do so. And because I think that they understand that this is an existential war for them. And it's right now, it's not a military war directly with the United States and NATO, but the only reason it's not is because the Americans lost their nerve after the strike on Yavoriv in early March. But the Russians recognize that this is a war, and they're going to win it. And the thing is, too, is that from the Russian point of view, they are making more money now than ever before. So from their point of view, they're like, we don't need the West. And every day that you have this Russophobia of these new sanctions, which are going to ban every Russian from getting a visa to go to the Schengen zone, all it does is just harden the commitment of the Russian people to this course of action. And to say that it's Putin's fault, that it's Putin's war, that's a lie. That's just ignorance. The whole Russian people, and certainly the leadership class, they've made up their minds. It's over. And so they're going to fight this war with the weapons that they have, which is energy. And you can't force somebody to sell you something that they've got. You can offer them all the money in the world, but they don't have to sell you whatever they possess that you desire. And so even if at this point, I think it's too late, quite frankly. Even if they came crawling to the Kremlin, Boris Johnson and Macron and Olaf Scholz and even Biden, if they came crawling up to the Kremlin, it's not Putin, it's the Kremlin itself, the entire leadership cadre of the Russian Federation that would say, no, niet, not going to happen. I mean, why would they? After all this Russophobia and this open hatred and this clear war footing against Russia, I simply do not see that happening. So I think it's immaterial, or it's pointless. It doesn't matter if the West has this awakening and realizing that they have to cut a deal and swallow their pride. I don't think that the Russians are going to play ball.
I think you may very well be right. I mean, I've been saying this for so long. Trust is an essential part of any commercial relationship.
Yeah.
It's an essential part of any arms control relationship. Why would the Russians trust the West? Let's say they switched on the gas and oil and things. In 5 years' time, given the attitudes that we've seen in the West, which have been massively shocking, by the way, to the Russians. I mean, Russians are deeply, deeply disturbed by them. I mean, to an extent that isn't, it's absolutely clear. But anyway, they will say to themselves, well, if we're going to be in the same position in 5 years' time as we are now, why bother? It's not as if we don't have alternative customers. Once upon a time, 50 years ago, the only show in town was the West. We had to sell our oil and our gas and our wheat and our metals and all the rest to the West because they were the people with the deep pockets and they were the people who could afford to pay for these things. It's no longer the case anymore. There's a much bigger world. There's China, there's the East Asian states, there's other places around the world. Even Africa, for all its economic problems, is not the place that it used to be. So we don't have to make these compromises. So let's not do so, because it comes with so much trouble, so much pain for us. And on the visa ban, by the way, I mean, here we see again an example of what Alex was talking about, the ideology taking hold. I wouldn't just say the ideology, but also the hysteria, because we saw Olaf Scholz and Macron all coming out, speaking out, mumbling words about, this visa ban is not a good idea. And so what does that actually amount to? Well, we're going to get the visa ban because in this situation of ideology, and I have to say this, hysteria, it is those who always push for the most extreme solutions who in the end win. I mean,
yes,
people are not prepared to tell these people, to have meetings with these people and say enough's enough, we have to stop. Because, of course, they're terrified that if they do that, well, Simon Tisdale will start to say that they're the enemy within. They're going to have articles appearing in places like Die Welt saying that, that they're backtracking on standing up to Putin. They're going to have articles in the United States saying that they're dividing the West, and they're scared. They're running scared always of the hardliners. And so even though they know deep down that this is a mistake, they're going to fall into line. Now, the Russians can see that, and they'll say to themselves, well, if the president of France and the chancellor of Germany fall into line with these crazy proposals, it shows definitely that there's no hope. There's absolutely no prospect of us ever doing a certain and guaranteed deal with them.
Why should they, Alexander? Why should people that know what these sanctions and what these visa bans and all these things are going to do to the European economy, what incentive do they have to call out the crazies, to call out the neocons, to call out all of these globalists and say, look, stop, you have to pull back, enough's enough? Because I'm looking at it and I'm listening to you and I'm listening to Gonzalo, and I say to myself, okay, if I'm sitting in the EU Parliament, say I'm one of these Parliament guys, and I know that all this stuff is just absolutely crazy and it's going to destroy the country that I represent. I sit there and I say, okay, I can speak up, I can say something, I can push back, or I can just shut up, not have people like, what's his name, Simon Tisdale, these guys write hit pieces on me. And at the end of the day, I'm making 20,000 a month as an EU Parliament member, plus 300 euros every time I step into the Parliament. I'm not going to suffer. The people, yeah, they'll suffer. My constituency, yeah, they will suffer. But me, my buddies here in Brussels, we'll make it through this, and I won't have my entire career destroyed. It reminds me, all of this reminds me of what was taking place a couple of years ago with doctors, and I won't get into it any further. I'll just leave it there. Gonzalo and Alexander, I'm sure the chat knows what I mean. But it's this type of terrorism in a way of, don't speak up, just be quiet, go along with it, and you'll be okay. Everyone else is going to be hurt, but you'll be okay. I mean,
exactly.
What do you guys think of that?
No, you got you put your finger on it exactly. That is exactly the thinking. At the end of the day, I mean, if Scholz and Macron, go along with the current hysteria, if you like, well, there may come a day when Scholz ceases to be chancellor. There will definitely come a day when Macron ceases to be president. But they will still be looked after. They will still be all right.
Yeah.
So better that, and this is the calculation all of these people are saying, better that than the vilification and abuse that you get if you're Gerhard Schröder, for example, the former German chancellor who did a lot of the deals with the Russians. Better that than be him, because he has been abused. His pension rights are now being threatened. He's at risk of losing his, he is losing his rights as a former chancellor. He's subjected to incredibly abusive interviews. Why put yourself through all of that? So yes, I know, I understand that. I completely take that. I think that's absolutely right. And of course, that's why ultimately the hardliners always win. People like Scholz and Macron may come mumbling along saying, visa bans are not a good idea. But in the end, weekly, they agree to them. Scholz said, de-swifting Russian banks is not a good idea, but he agreed to it. Closing off Nord Stream 2, he didn't seem to be particularly keen on that, but he agreed to that. He has agreed to everything with all the consequences that he probably anticipated and feared. But
Alex,
at no point in time has he been willing to push back.
Yeah, Alex, to answer your question, why aren't any of them doing this? And you correctly put your finger on it. And you see, it requires a degree, two things: a degree of moral courage to realize this is a terrible idea and we should not do it, and we should be adamant about not doing it. Number one, and number two, a clear sense that you represent the people, that you are a member of the people, that you are a citizen of your country. Whereas the people who are in leadership positions right now, they view themselves as a cosmopolitan international club that owes allegiance to each other, not to the people that they are allegedly represent. You have somebody like Sanna Marin, for instance, who made a fool of herself. And she's a microscopic politician in the scheme of things. But the point is that, she does not see the Estonian people as her people. She sees people like Trudeau, like Scholz, like Macron, like Biden, like the different leadership cadres of these countries. She views them as her true constituents. And so she's not going to go against those people, even though it's putting Finland in jeopardy. I mean, it's excuse me, I misspoke and I said Estonia, I meant Finland. She's putting the Finnish people in jeopardy. And, for what? If you think of it as if she's representing the people of Finland, her behavior is nonsensical. But if you look at her decision to have Finland be a part of NATO, and you realize that she belongs to this internationalist clique that owes allegiance to one another, then it becomes very, very clear And that's what's going on with all of these leadership classes, because they have taken this idea of pan-Europeanism, and it allows them to divorce themselves from the local people from where they came from and join this internationalist class, this jet-setting class, call it what you will, that has nothing to do with whatchamacallit, with the people or the well-being of the people. So since they are all cowards, because again, they rose to positions of prominence not by sticking their necks out, but rather by going along with the flow. And so if going along with the flow, acquiescing to whatever is put in front of you, gets you to positions of power, and sticking your neck out, doing something that other people don't agree with, does not help your career prospects, well, then at the crunch time, like now, they're not going to make the brave decision, the necessary decision, the wise and moral decision. They will make the decisions that are short-sighted and in their own personal interests and the interests of this elite cosmopolitan class that has nothing to do with the people. That's my vision on this whole situation. I don't know if you gentlemen would agree with that.
No, I entirely agree with that. And I mean, I think that the person you mentioned is a classic example of this. So it's a classic example, by the way, of the point that Alex was saying. I mean, you know, she's parting away. She's not directly affected. Even if she ceases to be Prime Minister of Finland, she'll still be able to go on parting away, because the world
parting with rock stars, literally.
Exactly. The world that she belongs in, the bubble that she belongs to, is increasingly remote from that of the people that she claims to represent. Now, once upon a time in the West, it was otherwise. I mean, I can remember a time when you had parties, political parties, very deeply rooted in Western societies. In Britain, the Conservative Party was based on shop owners, small businesses, industrialists, people of that kind. You know, those were the people the Conservative MPs used to mix and meet with and talk to. And the same was with Labour Party. I mean, in those days, you know, they were connected to the trade union movement. They met with workers.
It's in the name. They were labor.
Exactly. They were the Labour Party. They used to come along, meet in working men's clubs, in pubs, in trade union, you know, halls, and those sorts of things, in Methodist chapels, not to be underestimated, by the way. And of course, that world has gone. So you have, as you absolutely both rightly say, a political class that is now disconnected. It's no longer moored in the society that it is supposed to be governing, and it isn't really interested in it. They're much more interested, much more concerned in keeping on good terms with each other.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the chat is wondering about this Natalia Vovk person. That there's been very conflicting reports on that. I don't know if either one of you have been following that particular story, or we don't want to touch it.
No, I know. Are you talking about the photos that came out?
No, the photos I know were fake.
They're fake.
Yeah. But is the news itself that she is no longer with us? Is this accurate, or nobody knows yet? Because Pepe Escobar. I mean, okay. No confirmation yet.
No confirmation. The news that I'm getting right now, which I can't confirm. Well, I can't confirm. It's just the news that I'm getting here on Telegram, is that the Great Kherson counteroffensive apparently has started.
Yeah,
apparently.
Really? I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what the Ukrainian Telegram channels are broadcasting now. A whole lot, and they're saying that there's been a breakthrough of the first line of defenses, but the Russian Telegram channels are saying this is once again more information nonsense. So I mean, that's the only information that I really have, to be honest.
I agree with that, and I have to say, I mean, this would of course comes. I mean, I'm reading. This is in the Daily Telegraph, by the way. Today's Daily Telegraph. Ukraine risks heavy losses if counterattack is launched before major firepower is in place. And military leaders say they need more artillery before launching eagerly anticipated Kherson counteroffensive. So that's the Ukrainian commanders telling that to the Telegraph. and of course Ukrainian telegram channels telling us that this great Kherson offensive has now begun. I did take the story seriously. I think this is all telegram channels.
I'll read you. I'll read you from a Russian perspective. What there's one small little bit of information. If you look at the objective data, the Ukrainian forces have indeed started massive artillery fire from Posad Pogrovskoye in the direction of Chernobayevka. The HIMAR MLRS are trying to hit the targets in the rear. At the moment, there is no objective data confirming the loss of position by the Russian forces.
Well, we'll know soon enough. Well,
we'll know soon enough.
Yeah. This is what I'm getting right now. How long do you think this is going to last, everybody? This madness.
It's not going to end. It's not going to end.
No, I mean, it is going to end. But the question is in what form and in what way, and how soon. I think this is going. Okay,
I hate to. Going back to my philosophical days. How do you define the end? I mean, no. I mean, I'm asking seriously. What would you say is, because this is how I view the situation. That the West, the United States and Western Europe has declared war on Russia, and they are doing everything but military soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, but they are using the proxy the Ukrainian armed forces. And my thinking is that this war will not end, that the Russians will wind up sweeping Ukraine, and they will establish some sort of buffer zone, and they'll just shut the door on Western Europe and the United States. That's my thinking at this time, and that would be, quote unquote, the end. And I think that the Russians are going to basically say, look, we're not going to save your bacon. You're going to freeze and starve this winter, and that's your problem, not ours, because we're taking care of our people. So you take care of yours. And they're just going to, the Russians are going to turn their back on the Europeans, and the Europeans, they're just going to stew and collapse. I think that would be the end. I don't see any other outcome from this situation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know how long this is going to last, but it's going to last a long time, and we're going to see massive damage done in the meantime. And I think trying to put an end date on this is impossible. No, how did it end last time? When a Western country managed to get caught up in a spiral of madness, dragging much of Europe behind it. Well, it lasted 12 years. And it ended with the Red Army in Berlin. I mean, I'm not saying that, we're going to have the same outcome and the same end point, but eventually it does end. But I can't say when. All I can say is with a huge amount of damage in the process. And to be clear about this, I mean, you could already see symptoms of this madness beginning to build up for over a long time. And what was Russiagate at the end of the day?
I've always thought that the Russiagate thing was one of the most pernicious things that ever happened, because it was nonsense from the get-go. Everybody knows that after the fact. Yeah. But the thing is, see, for several years, it was this constant drumbeat that Trump is a Russian agent and he's a puppet of Putin and all the kinds of nonsense. And it ingrained a hatred for Russia and a distrust and an inability to see the world from their point of view so as to make a deal. Because whenever you make a deal, you have to understand the other side, your counterpart. You have to understand their motivation, how they view the world, so that you can come to an agreement where it's mutually beneficial and both of you have minimal costs, right? But because of the whole Russiagate nonsense, that possibility has been just completely wiped away, because people have reflexively, in the United States at least, the left and the right, whenever they hear Russia, it's like a tick. People automatically respond to it, certainly on the left, in a very negative way. And so I don't see them ever saying, okay, let's make nice with the Russians. Let's be friends now after all this, even though the whole Russiagate was strictly in the heads of the Americans, because the Russians objectively didn't do anything, No. It was all in the heads of these people. But, how do you go back from that psychosis to some sort of normal, rational interaction with another country? I don't think you can, at least not for a generation.
I totally agree, but I would just quickly disagree with you on one minor point, Gonzalo. Sure. I know plenty of people who still believe the Russiagate narrative. I mean, this is the thing that I mean, I mean, all right. I mean, most of the people who are sophisticated people, the people in Congress, no doubt, and the people who got lots of but an awful lot of
I
people
believe it.
still believe it, and nothing will ever happen, I suspect, in any proximate reality that will make them change their view. And I still read things about Trump which are beyond bizarre. I mean, very, very weird, and about Russia and Trump.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for laughing. I find it funny. I find it just laughable that anybody could take any of this nonsense seriously, but they do. They do. My goodness, So it's just the what's her name, Rachel Maddow, going night after night after night saying that that Trump was a traitor, a Russian agent, and all this stuff. And now, of course, when I started broadcasting, discussing what was going on here in Ukraine, and I just presented a realistic appraisal, and I thought I made some judgment calls that were retrospectively right on the money. Like I said that, you shouldn't be handing out weapons to any random civilian because it'll be dangerous. And I was called a Putin stooge, a Putin apologist, a Russian agent, and like I always tease people, if I'm a Russian agent, how come Uncle Vova still hasn't paid me? I mean, come on, I've been a loyal Russian agent for all this time and no money coming my way. But you see my point. It's absurd. Absolutely. Any kind of rational discussion, you are automatically a Russian agent. It's just stupid. And I think the most disappointing thing for me is how so many people whom I respected, whose points of view, their judgments seemed very rational, but very on point, they went psychotic on the issue of Russia. I mean, truly off the wall. And it just seems, I still don't understand how this Russia hysteria took over the West so completely. And I don't see it ending,
Well, I think the short answer to your question, your last question, is that an awful lot of people, far more people than I ever imagined or believed, were massively predisposed to hate Russia.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I can't explain the reasoning for that. I've struggled to come with explanations, but an awful lot of people, a huge number of people, are willing to believe anything about Russia that is bad if they're told.
Media propaganda.
There's media propaganda, movies, absolutely. Books
over many decades.
Over many decades. I mean, it's formed a view of Russia which is incredibly poisonous, and as I said, very easy to build a whole conspiracy structure around it.
I have an idea about that. I've been giving it a great deal of thought, to tell you the truth, and I've come to certain conclusions or certain ideas, and let me float them by you. You see, in the West, for the last 40 odd years, certainly the last 30 years, there's been a notion of what I call tolerance plus. It's not merely accepting behavior that you don't agree with, but rather suspending all moral judgments and never saying, look, I disagree with this. I think that this is a bad thing. Unless it directly affects you, everybody is supposed to accept anything, no matter how outrageous, decadent, degenerate, disgusting. Everybody's supposed to accept everything so long as it does not directly affect you. And I think that human beings, we are hardwired to make judgments about things of saying, no, this is good, but this is bad. We're not going to do this bad thing. And I think that this deliberate socialized suspension of judgment by way of this notion of tolerance plus, as I call it, has led people to sort of like, and this might sound weird, but hear me out. It's like their moral outrage has built up because they have been accepting so much behavior in the West, so many policies in the West, so behavior that you find disgusting and despicable. And everybody has to accept it, and it's built up in a moral cauldron, if you will, a moral pressure cooker. And people needed somehow to let this out, and they finally found something that they could all hate. You know, the 2 minutes of hate of 1984. It's finally they found something that everybody is allowed to hate and express all of their vitriol all of their pent-up resentment, all of their pent-up anger at things that they see in their own society, they're able to spew it out at the Russians. The Russians are sort of like almost like a screaming wall. There's a notion in China, I believe it's called the screaming tree, that you go to this tree to scream out all your anger and frustrations. I read about it in some novel years ago. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but the metaphor is the important. It doesn't matter if it's historically accurate. The point is that the Russians, we can hate on them. We can give our 2 minutes of hate and just scream at them, and bring out and purge all this anger and frustration we feel at our own society that we are not allowed to express. Because in the West, and I think that you gentlemen would agree with me, we are not able to publicly say that certain behaviors and certain actions are just wrong. They're despicable and deplorable and should not be accepted. We can't say this because we get canceled, we get deplatformed, we get fired, we get kicked off of financial services company. I think that might be part of it, and I think it might be a major part of it. That at least is my position. I don't know if chat would agree or if you guys would agree.
No, I absolutely would agree. I mean, absolutely, I would agree. Anyway, coming back to an earlier point that you were making.
Heavy stuff. This is heavy stuff. Yeah.
This is heavy stuff. But coming back to an earlier point that you were making, of course, the Russians have seen all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, they've seen what our attitudes. And coming back again to your earlier point, why would they trust us? Why would they deal with us and agree things with us?
Why should the Russians be the West's therapy punching bag or whatever it's called? Yeah, why? Why bother?
Why bother? Exactly. Yeah. So what is the incentive for them ultimately in selling their gas to us?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said before,
if there are other buyers, we might.
I mean, look, nobody is obliged to sell you some product that they have. As I said before, so if they don't want to sell it, what's Europe going to do? Invade Russia so as to force them to sell gas? I mean, come on. And the Russians are under Putin. They are sticklers for contracts, but all of the Gazprom contracts are ending. They're all winding down. And there are a few select customers left in Western Europe. I actually don't know the status of the contracts with Hungary and Serbia. I'm assuming that those are the two friendly countries that are going to continue to receive something. But I don't know the details, so I can't speak of that with any certainty. But I know that the other contracts for Germany and all the rest of it, that's over. That are winding down this fall. And so, you can't force somebody to sell you something that they possess. And so what's Europe going to do? Nothing. They can't do anything. And so Europe is going to go hungry, cold, in the dark. That's Europe's destiny this winter. After that, I don't know.
Is that the only way you can break, Alexander Gonzalo, is that the only way that you're going to break the cycle of hate that the West has towards Russia?
This is only going to increase the hatred. This is going to increase the hatred, of course. Because all the politicians, they're going to say, it's not us. We didn't do anything. It's the Russians. They don't want to sell us the gas. They want you to go cold. They want you to go hungry. Russia, bad. And that's what they're going to do to deflect the blame and the responsibility. That's what all politicians always do.
Here I'm going to push back a bit, Gonzalo. You can't assume that. I mean, it is not impossible that at the end of this cycle, and I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but it is not impossible that at the end of this cycle, if people have had to suffer a huge amount, they will say, enough's enough. We've got to come to a deal with the Russians because there really isn't any choice. And then once that is done, you could start to see a reassessment and a rethink of the whole situation in the relationship with Russia. And it may be that that is what is needed to break this peak Russophobia that we've now finally reached. But that's a hope. I'm not saying it's what's going to happen. We just don't know.
No, I mean, I hope somebody comes to their senses. But I mean, looking at the panoply of leaders in the West, what leader today can get power, number one, and actually cut a deal. I don't see any.
Yeah.
Sunak, Liz Truss, and the woman is the living embodiment that you can survive with a brain transplant.
There is no one, Gonzalo. There is no one in the British leadership who is prepared to make. I mean, we can talk about Liz Truss and we can talk about her inadequacies, but it's not as if there's anyone else who offers an alternative to what, to what she's saying. In fact, in some ways, I'm going to say this about Liz Truss. I mean, I don't take this as any kind of commendation, but Liz Truss is somebody who changes her position repeatedly. So she used to be a Remainer. Now she's a fervid Brexiteer. For it, just as a illustration, she was on the Liberal side of the Tory party. Now she's on the fervid far right side of the Tory party. So she might be, if anything, more flexible. I'm not saying she's going to be, by the way. I don't believe she will be, but she might be more flexible than some of the others. I mean, you're not going to get a change from Keir Starmer, who's the leader of the Labour Party. And if Keir Starmer goes and is replaced by someone else in the Labour Party, that person, whoever that person is not going to be any different either. Because if you look at our political system, it is now just like all the other political systems across Europe. It is a closed circle. The only place where there are glimmers of dissent that have managed to get, say, into the parliament is in France, where you see Le Pen has grown her support, where Mélenchon has also grown his support. They're both in the French parliament. They're both more critical. And it may be that this is, part of the French intellectual tradition, which does still exist. But elsewhere in Europe, and certainly in Britain, we see no break. By the way, I just wanted to flag up another comment that somebody made about fertilizer production in Europe having collapsed. Now, 70%. Now, I don't know whether that is.
It's accurate. It's accurate. It's accurate.
I take it you guys are aware that. Yes, I have heard of it. I mean, I gather that a major Norwegian company that produces fertilizer has had to stop production, for example.
Consequences?
Well, I mean, far more expensive food.
Well, no, not just far more expensive, less food. Not enough.
Well, okay, right. Because we're going to become more dependent on food imports, which are coming from where precisely? Food production, right?
The port of Odessa. That's what they want us to believe. Sorry, Alexander. They want us to believe.
No. I mean, I take the point entirely. But you see, there's the difference between reality, which is that food production is collapsing in Europe, around the world. And what do our leaders tell us? The way to solve the problem is by getting more food through Odessa, which anybody who knows the numbers knows that's not even close to be. I mean, it's an irrelevance. But
the thing about European food is the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the second largest food exporter on the planet. They are right there. They are literally Europe's breadbasket. And the farmers are on strike, and they're still protesting. And combine this with the issue of the fertilizers being cut in Norway, Europe is going to go hungry. And there isn't going to be enough food to go around. I don't know if anybody's actually worked out the numbers, the specific number of tons of food. And I hope, I mean, with all that incredible European bureaucracy in Brussels, I hope somebody has figured this out. I haven't seen it yet.
Don't count on it.
Yeah. They count toilet seats, but they don't count food production. I mean, that's the kind of yeah. But they don't count things that actually matter. But the issue of food for Europe, I cannot believe that I am alive at a time when it is likely that Europeans will go hungry. I can't believe that I am living through these times. It is truly shocking to me. It is it's sort of like living through the collapse of the Roman Empire or something. I mean, it really is. I cannot believe it. And Europe is going to go back to being the historical backwater that it was, because Europe is basically an appendage of the Eurasian continent, and it's always been a backwater. It was only briefly for these last 500 years a big deal, but I can't believe it. I'm sorry. When you see something that shocking, that the Europeans are actually going to go hungry and cold and without electricity, that the Germans are actually building these, what do they call these facilities to keep people warm? They have like a name for them. Well, they're basically building these shelters. Chat, help us out here. They're going to build, or they are in the process of building, these shelters for people who aren't going to have heating, so that they can go there and heat themselves up like they were toast or something like that. I mean, this is crazy, and it's just mismanagement. That's the worst part. You would think that with all these bureaucrats and all these managers, that they would be able to manage the situation halfway competently to feed people and keep them with electricity running. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My frustration is showing and making me sound like an idiot.
Because it is it's not. But I mean, you're not at all. Can I just say, Gonzalo? But you're absolutely right. I mean, that is not the priority at the moment. There's even been articles again in the British media about this. I was reading one the other day from Liam Halligan, by the way, who's one of the better economic commentators. He said there's an energy crisis in Britain. What is the government doing? ? Answer: when you go drilling down, is nothing. They don't have any ideas about what to do with the energy crisis. So that just isn't their plan. I mean, they haven't the skills anymore, or even the conceptual ability to sit down and work hard and come up with a solution to a problem. I mean, those kind of organizational skills at the center of political leadership in Europe just don't exist anymore.
They lie to us, Alexander Gonzalo. Well, they outright lie. I mean, we've been documenting. I think, Alexander, you were the first one to call out Habeck on his lie when he went to Qatar. And he came back and said, I found a replacement for LNG, everybody. No need to worry. The Qataris said, anything you want, we'll give it all to you guys.
And the Qataris say, what are you talking about?
And the Qataris, they said, what are you talking about? And didn't Ursula von der Crazy, she was lying about how the U.S. is going to bring all the LNG over to Europe. No need to panic. Everything is okay. So their only plan is to lie to the people and to blame Russia. That is their plan, though. I mean, when we say they don't have a plan, I agree, but their plan actually is just blame Putin, and people are gonna buy it. People are gonna believe it. It's why the media, they always say that we have an energy crisis because Russia invaded Ukraine, and they leave it there, full stop. They don't go any further. They don't put any context to it. They don't say that it wasn't Russia's invasion of Ukraine that caused this crisis. It was the sanctions and the reaction of our European, U.S., Canadian leaders that have caused this crisis. They don't go there. They just leave it as Putin's fault. That's their plan. And that is really their plan. I'm convinced that they sat in a room, all of them together in Brussels, the EU guys, and they said, we don't have a plan. It's all going to go to crap. Just blame Putin. And the people will believe it. Why? Why do you say that? Someone probably said, why do you say that, Ursula? Well, look at everything else they believed.
Basically. Because the people, you have an ignorant populace and they'll believe anything. A quick question I wanted to ask you, gentlemen, because I'm not up to speed on the lore on this. What's up with these turbines? The Gazprom 1 turbines? What the hell is going on with that nonsense? I mean, it's really an academic question. It's sort of like, I want to know the latest little twist and turn in the Mexican soap opera, even though I know how it ends. Because those turbine, those Gazprom 1 and 2, they're never going to flow gas ever again. I think that, might as well just, But I'm just curious, what explanation, what nonsensical lies are they telling? What's going on with that thing, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, first of all, can I just say the whole business about the turbine started with the Europeans and the Canadians and their sanctions, because of course Siemens sent it to Canada, and Canada wouldn't return it. So this gave the Russians the perfect excuse, reason, call it what you will, to say, well, we've got to reduce flows through Nord Stream 1. And of course, having got there, the Russians have, I think, played this for all it's worth, because, whenever, I gather one of these turbines was delivered, and the Russians say, oh, we need paperwork to know that it's not covered by the sanctions. And then, of course, you can't really provide that paperwork because, well, it sort of is covered by the sanctions. But
because we're Russians and we worry so much about the paperwork.
I know. But, the Westerners, they can't quite say this turbine isn't covered by sanctions, because if they did, that would be pulling back on sanctions. So anyway, the result is that the Russians have now got themselves into a wonderful position where they can always find a turbine that isn't working, that has to be maintained, that needs to be repaired, that paperwork is needed for, and they can play this game, it seems to me, indefinitely. And the result
they're basically trolling. The Russians are basically trolling the West.
Well, they're trolling the West, but also they can use it in order to say, well, look, we're not breaking our contracts. We're still prepared to supply gas through Nord Stream 1. But, there's all these problems with these turbines. So, it's all very well. All you need to do is to supply this with this document and that document. And, when you do that, well, actually, we also need another one. But
there's no signature here, and the stamp is crooked.
Exactly. Now you can say that this is very cynical, and at a certain level it is.
It is.
But
it's funny.
Well, it's funny, but we brought it on ourselves. Why do we assume in the West that we can sanction others and those others won't respond? I'm reading all the time, about Putin's weaponization of energy. Who weaponized energy? Who started this whole sanctions war? Not them. But I agree with Alex. Ultimately, they'll go on and they'll say it's all Putin's fault. He's done this. He's created this whole situation. And there are people who will believe it, and they will go on believing it, and they will go on believing it until, as I said, the point is reached. And this is the one thing I will say: until the point is reached, when they become so desperate that they don't care. I'm not saying that point will ever be reached, by the way, but that's the only way this is going to end. I don't think you can realistically hope to go out there in Britain or Germany or wherever and persuade people, well, actually, it wasn't Putin's doing after all.
But I mean, going back to your...
sorry, Alex.
Yeah, go ahead, Gonzalo.
No, my thinking is that they're never going to reach that point because, apart from the political embarrassment of having to walk back the sanctions, the leadership classes in the West are insulated enough in their personal day-to-day lives, and not just the leadership, not the Schultzes and Trudeaus and those people, but the multiple layers beneath them, the assistant undersecretary of whatever, all of this entire bureaucratic institutional class. They are sufficiently insulated that they can afford to have the people suffer and not suffer and believe themselves to be impregnable to any repercussions. So, you see, you give up your pride when you're truly desperate, when you truly are without money, without food, when things are really bad. That's when you swallow your pride. But these people, because they are insulated, they can afford to be as arrogant as they like and not walk back these idiotic sanctions and have the people suffer. And the problem, too, is that whenever the people try to articulate their just grievances, they are shut down by the institutions in Europe. The press is not reporting at all about all the farmer strikes going on in Western Europe, just ignoring it blatantly. Look what happened to the convoy in Canada. All those people were literally persecuted by the government. What's her name? Freelander was smiling when she said how their bank accounts would be closed and their ability to provide for their families would be annihilated. Oops, what happened to Alex?
Alexander. We lost him. He'll be back. He'll be back on. Go ahead.
And so, my thinking is that the leadership class in the West is sufficiently insulated that they can get away with their arrogance indefinitely. And I do not see them ever walking back any of these sanctions. And as the effects of the sanctions become worse and worse, they'll just double down, keep on doubling down on their bad decision. That's how I see it, and that's why I think that this is going to be a terminal break for Western civilization. And look, we mock the West, we say that the leadership class sucks and blah blah, and we bitch and moan and all the rest of it. But ultimately, we have to understand that this is a civilization, and we are teetering on civilizational collapse. Insane as that may sound, but if you look at it realistically, cold-bloodedly, the Western economies are not going to recover for at least 2 generations from this. And our Western civilization, our political environment is changing radically right before our eyes. It is becoming authoritarian / totalitarian. And of course, if there is greater crisis in terms of the economy and all the rest of it, they're going to roll out digital currency, and your social media will be attached to it. And if you say the wrong thing, you won't be able to buy food. I mean, we're going down really dark territory here, insofar as not just the economy, but the political future of the West, of the basis of Western civilization, and what has brought us this remarkable civilization. It's going down the tubes right before our eyes. Yes, chat, civilizational collapse is on its way. That's what we're seeing.
Well, I'm only going to say I've never known things to be so bad. Alex, I can't.
No.
I can't. Yeah, you're going to say.
I was just going to make two points on the Freeland issue that Gonzalo brought up. I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, someone in Alberta, I guess, stopped Freeland as she was.
Oh yeah, I saw it.
Anyway, he called her some names. Okay, probably not the best thing to do. In public, he called her some pretty nasty names. But anyway, that's beside the point. What I want to read is a tweet, a comment from Trudeau, just to show you how out of touch they are. He said, "The pattern of harassment of journalists is incredibly alarming and completely unacceptable. This type of behavior has no place in our society. No journalist should ever be threatened for doing their job." And then he talked about how no one in government should be threatened as well. No one should ever undergo this type of harassment. And I'm just listening to Trudeau. He gave a really long speech about this. He felt really proud about his speech, saying no one should be threatened. We shouldn't have this type of hatred, anything like that. And I'm just thinking to myself, has he forgotten everything that took place during the whole Ottawa, the trucker convoy, all of that stuff, and what they did to all the Canadians during that time period? It's like he forgot about all of that stuff. He forgot about everything that took place in Canada during the time of the lockdowns, everything. But when it happens to them, when it happens to one of their politicians, one of their journalists, then they're outraged. This should never happen. There's no place in society for this. But when it's someone else, someone that they don't like, someone who they want to shut down, then we have to shut them down. That's absolutely acceptable. And going to the turbine issue, the whole thing, if you were the CEO and Olaf Scholz and Justin Trudeau were your top level managers, and you gave them a task and you told them, look, guys, I want this is turbine. I want this thing back to Russia. Just get it back to Russia, get it in place so we can get gas back up to 60%. You would look at what these guys have been doing over the past 4 months, and you would fire both of them because they are not even trying. They're not trying. They're gaslighting people. They're completely playing everybody. They're not trying to get this turbine back. It's obvious. Olaf Scholz has the thing sitting in Germany, and he's taking photos with it. And what does he say? Oh, the Russians, they don't take this turbine back, and it's their fault. And he's taking photos with it. He's doing the whole media thing with this big machine in front of him and saying it's not my fault. Blame it on Putin. They're not even trying to get that turbine back in place.
They don't care. They don't care about the people.
Exactly, Gonzalo. That's exactly the point. They don't care. They don't want the thing back. They don't care to get it back. And if you were their manager and you were looking at the work they were doing, you would can both of them, and you would sit them both down and say, you're fired because you don't care about your job. You don't care about the work that you do. That would be the bottom line with these guys.
You don't care about the customers. And in Western Europe, the citizens are the customers of this leadership, and they don't care about the customer because they have a monopoly. That's what's going on. They can do whatever they want, and the customer is just going to have to suck it up, or go dark, go cold, and go hungry. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. To just to respond to two comments. Somebody, you did make the point, and I think this is something that we can't discount. That the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a massive period of crisis, but the times brought forth the man, and Putin appeared, and we can't discount the possibility that out of the same kind of crisis in Europe, something might come. I think it'll be more difficult. I think it'll be a lot more difficult in the West than it was in Russia, to be straightforward about this, because I think in Russia, the political system was much less congealed and repressive, ultimately, than it has become here. So that's the first thing to say. And I would also add that within the Russian state system, within the apparatus of the Russian state, there were always people who I think did retain a certain greater loyalty to their country than we see in the West. So that is the first question. But we can't discount that possibility. It's possible. I don't really see it, and we can't whistle in the wind and hope for it. That's the first thing. The second point was, what do I think of Liz Truss? I just wanted to quickly say I don't think anything of Liz Truss. I think she's hopelessly and completely inadequate to be British Prime Minister. A couple of years ago, if you'd asked me who Liz Truss was, I wouldn't have known. And I'm somebody who follows the political situation here in Britain closely. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979, I'd heard of her. I knew all about her. I'd known about her for years. She was somebody who, developed her political personality over a period of about 20 years. Liz Truss is one of these new people who's catapulted by this machine, springs out of nowhere, takes control, and she's not really in control, and she's a non-entity. But the same is true of all the others. I mean, that's what I'd say. I mean, we can laugh about Liz Truss, we can deride her and ridicule her, but she's no worse than all the others are.
Yeah, I think of the French Revolution, to tell you the truth, and the collapse of the Ancien regime. My thinking is that at that time in 1793, Napoleon was a nobody. He was just a minor general. Yes, he had a military victory, but he was nobody. And I think if we have a full smash, I mean something akin to a Soviet collapse, which I think is in the cards. It could be that the dictator, because I think that it will be a dictator, a full-on, dictator, a strong man of some sort. That man is hiding away somewhere in some bureaucracy or some position. He might be somebody that we're vaguely familiar with, but we haven't seen this figure emerge. And this figure, I think, will emerge when the chaos in the West becomes overwhelming. I think that could potentially be the summer of 2023, because we're looking at the winter. People can get through a lot under stress. We've seen that during the 2020 lockdowns. Now, what will happen in the 2023, the 22 to 23 winter, this winter that's approaching now? It's going to be misery for the Europeans. And it could be in the springtime and into the summer that the discontent becomes overwhelming. And I've emphasized this point in other opportunities. I do believe on this show, certainly on my show, that the migrant population in Europe, which is very large, we don't understand the powder keg that they are, because they thought that they were going to Europe and it was going to be, streets of gold and milk and honey and all the rest of it. And if they go cold, they are the ones who are going to be rioting. And that is going to be potentially an excuse to truly bring out the repressive forces of the current regime that we have in the West. But it would also spark the opportunity for some dictator figure to arise. So I think that this winter and into the summer of next year, these are extremely critical periods for Western Europe. Now, to turn to the United States, I do believe. I mean, I wanted to mention the fact of these, the student loan debt forgiveness or whatnot, or the bailout of the student loans or whatever. It's deeply, deeply unpopular, and everybody realizes that the whole idea is to get the youth vote, the down and out vote, to vote for Joe Biden or the Democratic Party come the November election, the November congressional and Senate elections. Now, I think that election is going to be as crooked as they come. And even if it were squeaky clean, neither side is going to believe the results. And so because of the 2020 election, which was retrospectively, it was very obvious. I mean, it's so obvious. It was obvious at the time that the election had been grossly manipulated, and it was a crooked election. And Joe Biden, no way he got the votes that he claimed, and all kinds of statistical analysis that I've seen pretty much proves the point. And the fact that so many of these contested counties and districts refuse to be transparent, that proves the point. I mean, you only hide stuff when you know that you've got a boo-boo, you know what I mean? And so the November 2022 elections that are coming up, 2.5 months away, I think it's going to be very important. I think, number one, it's going to be crooked, and nobody's going to believe the results. Number two, I think that's when the will of the Americans is going to relent. They're going to basically write off the whole Ukraine situation. And I suspect that the Russians are counting on this. I think that the Russians themselves are thinking, let's just keep on grinding away, slow and steady as she goes, and not make any sudden moves, and wait until the November election. And once that's over, when the Americans when the Biden administration can just, say, enough with this Ukraine thing, it's lost, it's a lost cause, because it won't politically damage the Biden administration and the Democrats. I think that's when the Russians might make big moves, and also when the Americans are just going to shrug and just turn away from the disaster that they left in Ukraine.
I just wanted to just make a few points about this. Firstly, I have to say this. Dysfunctional, corrupt, and broken as the political system in the United States may be, it still possesses a degree of vitality that you just do not find in Europe. And I think that is something that should not be underestimated. I agree there's going to be massive problems come the midterms. I also happen to think that the reason why Biden has done this debt forgiveness program is because he's appealing to a demographic that reliably votes Democrat already. And the fact that he's having to take these steps to try to shore up that demographic shows how precarious, in a way, the whole Democrat position has now become. By the way, can I just also add, it's an inflationary measure. It's a pro-inflationary measure. But I mean, I won't go into the details of all of that. But the very fact that the administration is obliged to take those kind of steps shows that there is a real challenge in the United States, that there's a political conflict in the United States which is open to some kind of argument, and where you might conceivably see a break with the kind of terrifying consensus that has existed. In Europe, by contrast, there is nothing like that at all. We are, politically speaking, we're not a desert, we're a prison. We just don't have people within the system, or even outside the system but knocking on the door, who might be there to provide realistic alternatives. So yes, I agree. If there's going to be a change of course, if it's going to happen in it's going to come from the United States. It's not going to come from Europe, and that unfortunately is unequivocally the case. Now, I just wanted to also touch on this business of Napoleon, if I can say so, because you mentioned now this political crisis in France, a terrifying political crisis in France, breakdown of the economy, massive a war that France at one point was clearly losing, and out of this man appeared who pulled things together, and he's controversial, but he was a titanic figure in French life. Well, but consider the society he came out of, because France might, in the late 18th century, have been politically dysfunctional, which it was, but it was going through a colossal intellectual upswing. You had the philosophers, you had the artists, you had the music, you had all this going on. Look at Europe today. What do we have? We've got nothing. We are a cultural wasteland, and that's one reason why I find it very difficult to believe that we're going to see some great person appear who will somehow put the pieces together, because I don't see what the intellectual underpinnings for such a person can build on. I just don't see where they are. I've never known Europe as disorganized, as weak, as dysfunctional, as arid as it is now.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I always think of architecture. I've always thought that architecture expresses a civilization's vitality. And the architecture that we have now, the interior, I mean, we don't have any kind of exterior architecture, and the interior architecture that we have is arid. That's the word. And that's why I'm bringing up this particular issue of architecture, because it's sterile. It's empty. It's this, gray walls, minimalist and square rooms, and no decoration, no decor, no point of view. And certainly on an intellectual level, I do not see any writer, any thinker that I respect. The only one would be Michel Houellebecq. He's the only one who seems to be, with his eye on the ball. But other than him, I can't think of any writer, certainly not in the United States. There's nobody, it seems to me.
Well, a European society where somebody like Zizek is taken seriously as a philosopher is in severe trouble. That's all I will say about him.
That was a low blow.
That was a very low blow.
All right, so Gonzalo, what's it?
No, nothing. Go ahead, Alex, please.
We're approaching 2 hours. Do you guys want to start wrapping this up?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's do so.
We'll answer all the questions. We'll do them probably tomorrow, Alexander. We'll answer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
in a dedicated video tomorrow. Even though we answered a lot of questions during this stream, actually, this was a good interaction between everybody, actually, to keep this show moving. Any final thoughts, guys, about everything that's happening? The update, by the way, with regards to this, to the great Kherson counter-offensive, here's a quick update that there's still not much information with regards to the offensive on Kherson, but the Ukraine forces, according to what I'm seeing here, appear to have launched an attack on another front from the direction of Kryvyi Rog.
Yeah, I'm getting
nine tanks is what I'm seeing. Once again, I can't confirm any of this 100%. I'm just reading you what I'm getting.
Well, I'm going to make a guess here. I think these are spoilers. The Russians have been closing in on Nikolaev, and these are attempts to try to disrupt that offensive. This is what it looks like to me. And clearly there's been a major uptick of the fighting there. But it seems to me the Ukrainians are on the back foot, and they're trying somehow to slow this offensive down. So they're making pinprick attacks on its flanks, which is completely logical. But I don't think that there is a Kherson counteroffensive materializing. I think some Ukrainian bloggers who got overexcited. They've seen pictures. I gather one particular film of artillery strikes, and I think they think that this is somehow means more than it really does. That's what I personally think about
the deputy head of Odessa Regional Military Administration, Matsulevich, who officially announced that the battles for Kherson had begun, has deleted that post.
Yeah, because at the end again, people don't seem to understand. They see some video of some battle. And it's a few soldiers running around shooting each other and all the rest of it. Some of it quite dramatic, most certainly. But see, ultimately, this is industrial warfare. It doesn't matter what's happening in one particular area of the battlefield. We are talking about tens of thousands of men who are in constant conflict, shooting at each other day and night. So we see one video of this or that, and it means nothing. And I mean no disrespect to anybody who's there on either side. But you see, you have to look at it statistically. And that's something that people have a very hard time understanding, that when something is that big, you have to look at the statistics. You have to look at the ground covered and captured. The dozen villages that have been taken and so forth. You don't look at one particular, 9 tanks. In this conflict, 9 tanks is nothing. The Russians wipe out 9-10 tanks in a morning before having a nice mid-morning snack. You know what I mean? Because that's the level of this. The HIMARS, they kept talking about the HIMARS. And well, how many HIMARS are there? 8 that we know of that are still surviving, because we know that the other 8 were destroyed or potentially captured by the Russians. You are talking about a front line that is 1,200 kilometers long. 8 HIMARS means nothing, less than nothing. And so, all this stuff of like, 9 tanks moving there, I'm like, come on. You have to look at the big picture and see the overarching thing. And when the Russians are amassing, 35,000 to 40,000 men and getting ready to shove them into this conflict, something big is coming, and no little counteroffensive is going to stop it.
Well, indeed. And can I just point out, just to add to your point, Gonzalo, I mean, it is now universally accepted that on certain days, the Russians fire 70,000 rounds of artillery a day. Which is, I was told that's more than the United States expended in the first Gulf War, in the entire first Gulf War. So, but I mean, when you're talking about 70,000 rounds of artillery a day, 9 tanks, it just doesn't mean anything. It's a minor thing. Anyway. Yeah. To summarize, and I think you're absolutely correct, Gonzalo, we are at the end of an era. I mean, I think this is going to mark a huge watershed. It's a big watershed moment. It's a bigger watershed, actually, than the fall of the Berlin Wall. Because the fall of the Berlin Wall was a collapse of an exhausted, but not central system. This is much bigger than that. We're seeing the collapse of Europe, of the kind of system that's existed in Europe. And inevitably, this is the decline of the West. I mean, it's the moment when the West is being pulled back. And those who will say that I'm overstating things, I was reading an article in The Economist. The Economist is an extraordinary journal that we have in Britain, which loves every dictatorship apart from the Russian, and thinks the United States is the greatest thing. Provided Trump isn't leading it, that the United States, or should we say, the neocons in the United States are, the angels, and everybody, and the Russians are the demons. Anyway, even The Economist comes forward and says that the sanctions war is not going as well as expected. All right, but this has massive bearing on the ability of the West to project its power globally. Even The Economist admits that the West is losing control. Now, if The Economist is able to do that, we can say definitely that is the trend. And it's going to intensify from this moment. It means that this long era of the undisputed, unchallenged hegemony of the West, which goes all the way back to the 16th century, is starting to fade.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah.
Right. And as always, the MIC is laughing all the way to the bank.
Absolutely. Perfect comment from a summer of, I couldn't quite get his name.
1970,
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. He's absolutely right. And I mean, they've just given themselves another $3 billion, which, by the way, I'm sure we were all watching the new Atlas, and I think it was also discussed on one of our own live streams that, this is a nice, they're getting the money, they're getting the contracts out, before the war ends, because otherwise, they can't. They would have to go back to Congress and get this all recycled again. So there we go.
Do you guys? The last point I want to ask you: do you guys think that following the November elections, however they turn out, and however messy that whole election is, that's when the Americans are just going to turn off the spigot on the whole Ukraine thing?
It could be. It could very well be. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think it depends a great deal on what happens in those November elections. The Republicans win big in the House and make gains in the Senate and gain control of the Senate, then I think there will be a momentum in the US to switch this off. But be under no illusions, there'll be enormous pressure to keep it going anyway.
Yeah.
I think there is also probably now a conflict between some of the uniformed people at the Pentagon and the hardliners at the State Department, the National Security Council, and all of this. And the uniformed people are saying, well, you've been giving away our weapons. How are we going to fight a war if it blows up somewhere else? We've got to slow this down. And this $3 billion arms deal, which wasn't an arms deal, but a contract, a sweetener for the MIC. Well, it could be seen as a sign that this funneling of weapon systems to Ukraine is running down already, because probably the Pentagon is saying enough's enough. We can't run down our own reserves to the extent that we've been doing up to this moment.
Yep. All right, and Emery Chen, yes, keep Germany down, keep the U.S. in, and keep Russia out. Definitely with point one. And economic destruction, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN could be ensuring number two spot, recognizing number one is gone. Yeah.
Absolutely. All this is true, but of course, I think that it's running out of control because it's now going to have negative impacts on the United States. I mean, this is the great. We've talked about this so often. The great masters of the universe, as they believe themselves to be, these globalist masters of the universe. People in the United States who think, we weaken even our own allies, and that makes us stronger. But of course, what they're actually doing is that they are disrupting the system upon which they sit. They're sawing off the branch that they're sitting on. And in terms of US global power, weakening your own allies at a time when you face a challenge from the Eurasian bloc is not such a good idea geostrategically, after all. But if you're Jake Sullivan and you're Tony Blinken, perhaps you don't see these things.
Well, look at the contrast between the United States and the Marshall Plan and the current situation. In the 40s, the United States wanted to uplift the European economy because they recognized that a prosperous Europe would be a much stronger ally. Whereas today, the Americans think that any ally has to be undermined and undercut and pulled down. I mean, that shows you how America has changed. It used to be a country that wanted to raise up everybody, and now it's just pulling everybody down and has become an empire of chaos.
Yeah, absolutely correct. This is completely right. I mean, the America of the 1940s, the America of George Marshall, was a completely different place from America of today. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not saying, didn't do some pretty dreadful things in all kinds of places, and that it wasn't affected by its hypocrisies, and that it didn't have its corruptions and its organized crime networks and all of those things. I'm not idealizing it, but it was a completely different country, far better led, far more intelligently led than the America we have now. And this expression, the empire of chaos, I once said, quoting a classical thing, that, according to Tacitus, a British chieftain once said that the Romans make a desert and they call it peace. The Americans make chaos and call it freedom.
Yes. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I would agree.
On that note, we will end this live stream. Gonzalo, I didn't ask you at the beginning of the stream. Where can people find you? Do you have any More
Yeah,
shows in the pipeline. What's going on?
I'm doing my roundhouse, my roundtable, and that show is going very well. And tomorrow I'm going to have a very good episode with Jackson Hinkle and Alex Stein. You know, Alex Stein, the guy who's been harassing AOC. Yeah, and also Razor Fist. And so it's going to be quite a very interesting conversation between these three gentlemen, because the idea of the roundtable discussions is to have three people, not necessarily of the same issue, but just different people of the dissident community coming together and interacting, because I think it's important to cross-pollinate, if you will. And so please follow me on the Gonzalo Lira 2 channel. And Alex, I'd ask you to put a link.
I have that linked. I have that link down below already. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
And yeah, that's where you can find me. And also I have a Twitter account. And so it's Gonzalo Lira 1968, all one word.
That.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And yeah, the roundtable, I'm having some really interesting people. Tomorrow, I'm having Razor Fist, Jackson Hinkle, and Alex Stein. On Thursday, I have Michael Millerman, and we're going to be discussing the Alexander Dugin's political philosophy. And on Saturday, I have some other really good guests. I don't have the guest list in front of me, but I have like a full deck on board. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's a great show. And so please check it out.
Great. Definitely check it out, everybody. What time is it going to be taking place, the one tomorrow?
The one tomorrow is going to be at noon Eastern. There isn't any fixed time. I try to do it Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. There's no fixed time. And by the way, this Sunday, I think I'll be doing another open house. Both of you gentlemen are, of course, cordially invited to drop in whenever you feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And that's great to hear.
Yeah. So tomorrow at noon Eastern, Razor Fist, Hinkle, and Stein.
All right. Excellent. Fantastic. And Alexander, where can people find you?
Where can people find me? On the Duran.
All right. On the Duran and the Alexander McCurry's channel.
Wow. Yes.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll end it there, everybody. Thank you to our moderators. Let me give a shout out to our moderators. We had Zariel with us, Valley S, Reckless Abandon, GEC, Alice in Blunderland. I love it. Alice in Blunderland. And who else was moderating? Gonzalo Lira and myself. We were also moderating. So thank you to our moderators. Did I miss anybody that was moderating? I don't think so. I think I got everybody. So thank you to our moderators. Thank you to everyone that watched us on Odyssey, on Rumble, YouTube, and theduran.locals.com. Thank you to our locals community and the locals chat. And we will get all the questions that we didn't answer. I think we covered most of them. We'll get whatever questions we didn't answer. We'll get them wrapped up tomorrow. Take care, everybody.